Well, I will not be talking about oral hygiene, although I'm sure my dentist would approve if I did. So we're going to sort of change tack a little bit tonight, and I'm going to tell you about, instead of research that we do, some of the stuff that you can participate in and some of the really cool things that you could potentially see in our night skies this year. And where to see them also. So any of you who were here for the November 1-minute talk, I did a very, very, very brief introduction to some of the public star party stuff around Central Texas and West Texas that you guys can take part in. But I'm going to expand on that a little bit tonight since I have a little bit more than 1 minute to talk about it this time. I also decided to organize this around objects as opposed to just chronologically going through the year and the various things you can see. We're actually going to sort of do it in groups. So to start out with, some of the most fun, see, I'm going to get this clicker right. Yeah, eclipses. So we actually are going to have 5 eclipses this year. One of them has actually already happened. And as you can see, we started out with a partial solar eclipse in the first week of the year, but it was kind of visible over sort of a limited area, not visible in Austin, frowny face. But as I'm sure most of you probably already know, total lunar eclipse coming visible in Austin. So it gets the smiley face there. And these are the details. So lunar eclipses are great because they're something that you don't really need any specialized equipment for. You can just go out in your backyard, weather permitting, of course, which I believe it's supposed to be pretty good this weekend compared to tonight, if I remember correctly. So hopefully this one should be a pretty good view for us here. So these are all the details you can see on the side there. But it's one of those things also, they last so long, you can just kind of wander out, watch it for a little bit, go back inside, warm up a little bit, wander back outside. So there's plenty of time to enjoy this one. So for the next one, we have a total solar eclipse. Not visible in Austin, frowny face. This one, yeah, so I think eclipse cruises are probably your best bet for this one. You'll notice the primary landmass is South America, although the path of totality, that little inner line there, does scoot very closely to where the Giant Magellan Telescope is being built. So the workers on the site will get treated to a nice total eclipse then. Then we have a partial lunar eclipse, also not visible in Austin, frowny face. So if you've been keeping track, you'll notice that we have had 4 different types of eclipses. We've had 2 lunar, 2 solar, partials and totals. There's one other type left. It's a type of solar eclipse. Does anyone know the one other type that we haven't mentioned yet? Yes, I know these guys up here know it. Yes, we have an annular. That is, again, not visible in Austin, frowny face, although the path is kind of making a happy face there. So an annular eclipse is one where the angular size of the moon is not quite big enough to completely block out the disk of the sun. So you're left with this sort of ring of fire around it. So unfortunately, we're not going to get to see this one. However, as again, I'm sure some of you, especially these folks up here, know, we have some coming. So this is actually a small preview of coming attractions beyond this year. So we actually have an abundance of riches coming here in Central Texas. We are going to get this really cool annular eclipse. This is, see, I knew I was going to hit this button wrong at some point. This is a simulation of what the annular eclipse in October 2023 will look like here in Austin. San Antonio is actually a little closer to the center line, so they'll actually see it more symmetric. And then, of course, the big one comes about 6 months later, total solar eclipse passing right through deep in the heart of Texas. And we'll get about 2 minutes of totality here in Austin, but the real place to be will be somewhere along the center line, which you can see has some pretty nice population centers through it. I'm kind of anticipating that we'll get a fair amount of publicity around this one, like the one back in August of 2017. But given the time of year this one is, I have a sneaky suspicion weather-wise, Texas will have the best chance of good weather. So I think a lot of people are going to come to Texas to view this one. So whereas the last one was the Great American Eclipse, this one will be the Great Texan Eclipse. So of course, we have every year various Sun-Earth interactions. These are just sort of an overview of sort of the waypoints of our orbit each year. So we have our distances, our perigee and apogee, our closest point, farthest point from the sun. We can see you've already passed perigee. And the various landmark solstices and equinoxes. Of course, this has a northern hemisphere bias, although yeah, technically, I should just call them the March equinoxes and, month solstices, but I do have a Northern Hemisphere bias. So one thing is funny because one thing that you can kind of do is sort of a little bit of citizen science from your own backyard with regards to like the equinoxes and solstices. I got a great phone call on the public line in the department a few months ago, someone wanting to know the date of, I think it was the upcoming winter solstice at that point, because he has a fence that he sees out his window every morning and he watches the sunrise over it. And he wanted to know exactly which post was going to be when the December solstice was, and he was actually going to start noticing when the solstices and equinoxes were, which fence post the sun rose over. So you could probably do something out of your own window, either sunrise or sunset, and watch how the sun moves across the horizon over the course of a year. If you're interested in seeing the sun itself, so in my other life, when I do field trips for school kids that come to UT, I actually run a solar telescope, and we do solar observing during that. And I am actually a big advocate of safe solar observing, safe being the really very important part of that. But getting interested in actually learning ways to do that, to get the equipment, or even start out with little pinhole cameras and stuff, and learning how to do solar observing and looking at sunspots. And unfortunately, if you were to do it this year, you're probably going to be a little disappointed, because if you're noticing it, this is a representation of the current 11-year sunspot cycle we're in, and you can see where 2019 falls on this. We are at dead minimum. We're basically rounding out cycle 24 and starting into cycle 25. However, you'll also notice it's a little hard to see one of them here, that there's two dotted lines, and apologies for the people in back who can't see this. These are predictions for how cycle 25 may start. So if the group that made this prediction is correct, actually you might start to see more sunspots creeping up over the course of the year. So it might still be worth keeping an eye on. And if you don't want to actually go out and get the solar filters and do all that stuff, or learn how to do it, there's also online, check out the Solar Dynamics Observatory website. There's great imagery there. Of course, the moon has some fun things during the year besides eclipses. We have our full moons. This is the ones for the year listed here. And of course, everyone usually makes a big deal about the largest full moon of the year. Technically, it is February's, but this month's and March's are actually pretty close too. So they occur fairly close to when the moon is at its closest point to the Earth in its orbit. So it appears a slightly larger angular size, whereas the one in this particular year, it'll be September, will occur when the moon is at apogee, the farthest point. So this is actually a representation done by an astronomer taking pictures of the two different, so you can actually see the difference in size. So it's something that the average person probably won't just notice with their naked eye. But again, you might be able to find ways to measure it for yourself and actually see, okay, yeah, this one was a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. So we're going to quickly go through the planets in 2019. So Mercury is the one that probably gets ignored the most because it is actually really hard to observe because it never gets too far away from the sun. So it actually goes through its orbit in, I think it's 88 days, and we catch it when it's on the edges here. Those are the greatest elongations, and I have two of the better ones represented here, and apologies, I really should have made these larger, but that's where Mercury is there shortly after sunset, and this is shortly after sunrise, or did I get those backwards? There's Mercury there. So that's about as far as it ever gets away from the sun, so it can be a little tricky to observe. But you'll also notice, of course, it passes in front of the sun and behind the sun in what we call conjunction. This would be the superior conjunction. This would be inferior conjunction when it passes in front. And 13 times a century, it actually transits the sun. So some of you, I'm sure, saw the Venus transit back in 2012, and if you didn't, I'm sorry, you will probably not get another chance because the next one's not for about another 100 years. So eat your Wheaties if you want to try that one. But Mercury actually does transit a bit more often. Unfortunately, it's also a lot smaller, so it's a lot harder to see than Venus was. But this one will be visible in Austin, so it gets the happy face. And you can see the transit will actually start before sunrise in Austin, but it will still be going on quite a while because it's tiny and the disk of the sun is big. In fact, that's Mercury right there And this is from the one from 3-4 years ago. I don't remember exactly when it was. But we will do some special observing on campus with our heliostat, which projects the image of the sun onto a wall about, 3 feet across. That's actually what this picture down here at the bottom is. That's just my cell phone taking a picture of the wall. But keep an eye out for more information, but we will do some special viewing for this. Venus, pretty much always fun to keep an eye out for. It's big, it's bright. Look for it in the mornings, look for it in the evenings. Its greatest elongation west, so this is when you'll see it in the morning skies, just past. And superior conjunction, again, is when it goes behind the sun from our point of view. And this is when it will pass from our morning skies into our evening skies. So you'll start to see it in the early evenings towards the end of the year. Mars, unfortunately, I have bad news for you with Mars. Mars is not going to be that great this year. So I've got here some orbital diagrams of the distances between Earth and Mars as we orbit. So every 26 months or so, we actually have our closest approach to one another. And that's what's represented here with these arrows, and you can see the distances here. So we just had a pretty good one back in July of last year, and our next really good one will be in October of next year. So we're kind of in the doldrums here in the in-between. So Mars is actually just up. It's small. You'll see it as sort of a reddish star in the early evening, but it actually will be visible for quite some time this year before it goes into conjunction in September. This next one, you can see it's almost as close as it was back in July, so hopefully we'll get another really good view of it in 2020 without a global dust storm all over it like there was last year, unfortunately. Jupiter, always fun to watch too. So it will be at opposition, so that's when it rises at sunset and is visible all night and will set at sunrise, and it's typically the sort of best and brightest, but really for some time around that point, you'll still see it pretty well. So this is just another cell phone picture I did holding it up to the eyepiece of one of our telescopes on campus, a little overexposed so you could get all the moons in. We'll definitely be showing Jupiter through most of the summer and early fall at our public viewing. And one of my favorite things to point out when we can see them is the shadows of some of the moons transiting across Jupiter's disk. Now, we do not see it this nice and steady in our campus telescopes in light-polluted middle of Austin. This was a nice amateur image I found, but you can sometimes see when the air is really nice and steady, see these shadows of the moons go across. Of course, next, one of my personal favorites, probably a lot of other people's favorites, Saturn. So Saturn, this is a representation of how the angle of the rings changes with respect to how we see it from Earth over a large cycle. And you can see we actually have been in a pretty good stretch here. But over the next few years, that ring system is going to start going more edge on to us. So we're going to circle back into one of these times where when you look at it in a telescope, you're going to see the disk of the planet like with a line going through it. So it's not going to be the spectacular Saturn that you would expect to see. But we still have a few years before we get to that point. So again, another cell phone picture held up to the eyepiece of one of our telescopes to see. So when the air cooperates and we get nice steady views, we do get really nice views of Saturn. And I have to include our ice giant friends. The planet Uranus, it's heading into conjunction in a couple of months. We could still see it for a little bit late this spring. I might occasionally show it our public viewing on campus, but I haven't really decided too much yet. The problem is when it comes back at opposition and is rising right after sunset, it rises right over a red aircraft warning light from where we view it. So I usually have to wait for it to get back over a little bit more so you don't have this red glow coming out of the bottom of the field of view. And Neptune, also, occasionally I will show it. It's just a little tiny blue dot in the telescope, but it's a tiny little blue dot most people have never seen with their own eyes. So I kind of go for that rarity angle when we show it. And then finally, for other kind of regular events that people tune in for every year, we have meteor showers. And unfortunately, we have more frowny faces with this one. So these are the three best known, usually most reliable meteor showers. And all of them will have really unfortunate moon phases with them this year. So that means the moonlight's going to be pretty bright and it's going to wash out a lot of the really faint meteors, and you're just really not going to get as spectacular a view as if you had like a new moon. But of course, that's just for this year. So upcoming years, it'll time out better. It always cycles back through. So for the other very quick roundup to finish out the where to see them part of my title, just a little bit more about some of our public viewing on campus and some other places in Central Texas and West Texas that you can see some of these things. So this is our 16-inch reflector at RLM that's open on Wednesday nights. We'll be starting up in about, I guess it'll be 2 weeks from tomorrow, and this is the one I run. So I've actually used this telescope since I was a student, so that was a number of years ago. But I know this one well. It's my baby. And so we'll be starting out with probably Orion Nebula and maybe Uranus and the moon when it's up. So those are sort of the things we'll be looking at to start out the spring. And then as we cycle back into Jupiter and Saturn coming up, we'll kind of rotate those in and some other objects here and there, depending on if the weather's cooperating and various other issues. And we also have our telescope at Painter Hall, and wow, I didn't realize how dark that other photo was going to be. So this is the one that's over on Painter Hall near the tower in the middle of campus. And this is the old antique telescope, and it actually was purchased used when it was put on the building at Painter Hall when it was built in 1932. So some parts of this telescope are actually over 100 years old. It's all mechanical. It's really great. You wind up a weight, and it spins a flywheel, and that's the clock drive for the telescope. And the dome that you can see from the ground, you see it's green. It's actually copper, so that is the patina that it has acquired. So this one will be open Fridays and Saturdays starting next week. And we have an undergraduate student who's running this one. And of course, I got to shout out to our friends at the Austin Astronomical Society, which I think we have a few representatives of here. They do have public viewing events. I think there's one coming up in a week or two, right? It was 26th, yeah. But keep an eye on their website for other events. And of course, you maybe consider joining if you get interested in amateur astronomy. And I also wanted to mention Reimer's Ranch. Apologies for the long URL, but if you just Google Reimer's Ranch, you'll find them. There's an observatory out. It's in, I think, southwest part of the county, so fairly dark skies. I personally have not been there yet, but we do have, I think some of our former undergraduates may still be working there. I know some have in the past. And of course, especially since I think some of them might still be here, some of my coworkers from West Texas are in town, so we got to put a shout out to McDonald Observatory. So there are the twilight programs and star parties. You can see 3. Also, they do theirs 3 nights a week, and they have this expanded spring break schedule through the middle of March, and it does get pretty crowded out there during that time. But of course, they're in one of the darkest parts. It's right around there somewhere. I think that light there is actually Fort Davis. So you can see one of the darkest parts of the state. And if you're lucky and you time it right and it's available, you can get tickets for special viewing nights on the 36, 82, or 107-inch telescopes out there. So a chance to actually see through some of those big research telescopes. And I've actually looked through all 3 of those, and any one of them is spectacular. So don't think just because you're at the 36-inch, it's like, oh, but it's not the 107. No, they're all good, especially since you're in a really dark site. And with that, I will take questions. Assuming anyone has questions.
All right, questions for our star party queen.
You really can't see anything up here with those
There's
lights,
things in the sky, you guys. I don't know. I don't know if there's questions.
Yeah, there's a question.
On the balcony.
What's your favorite thing to see in the sky?
So the question was, what's my favorite thing to see in the sky? Saturn. Saturn's definitely one of my favorite things to observe, especially, I have to say, seeing it through the 36-inch out at McDonald one time where you could see a bunch of the small moons that we never can see in the middle of Austin. That was really spectacular. I also, as I mentioned, love watching those shadows of the moons go across Jupiter. That's pretty neat, too.
So I will point out that there's little flyers in the back room with
I
information about our star parties that our star party queen leads. So if you'd like to take one on your way out, that has all the information for you if you'd like to come look through one of our telescopes and see some of the amazing things that she's been talking about. Are there any other questions?
Run over there.
In the front?
A few more, yeah.
Do any of these observatories have websites to allow individuals to view through any circumstance?
Oh, yeah. So I guess I didn't really completely define. So all of these are the public viewing opportunities for anyone to come to. So these are open for just the general public to attend at any of these. So is that what you were asking, or you mean like individual?
No, your other my question was what I was asking is there are online sources. Can I at home view what they
Oh, I see what you said. So the question was whether we have like a live digital stream of what's coming out of the telescope. No, we actually don't for the ones here on campus. I don't think they do any of that out of McDonald. I mean, they have remote observing, but that's for actual research. So, but I was just chatting with someone. They probably will be doing a live stream of some sort of the lunar eclipse, but it's an amateur is setting up to do it out there, and he'll be streaming it himself. But so none of these will have live events like that, although there are other resources out there for things like that. And of course, I'm blanking on any of the names of them off the top of my head right now. Yeah, SLOOH, that's it. That's one of the ones I was thinking of. SLOOH, yeah.
Any other
Oh, there's one over there.
questions? Yes.
You might want to mention the Texas Night Sky Festival.
Yes, and unfortunately, there were a number of things like that that I didn't actually get in at the last time. That is in March, correct? Yes. In fact, I just found out more about it today, and I had to send off my. And there's flyers on the table.
So the
Okay,
Texas
excellent.
Night Sky Festival is happening in March, and there's more information on the table.
And I know Bill Wren will be giving a dark skies talk, I think, for either at the event or the night before, or one of the days in there. Bill Wren gave an awesome talk about preserving dark skies here at AoT a few years ago. It was really good.
Any other questions?
Wow, those lights are bright.
This light- right here in the back.
So we know the sun is more than 50 years old, so why is it only on the 25th solar cycle?
I didn't quite. Oh, the 25th. I got you. The 25th. They started counting the sunspot cycles in, I want to say 1750, if that math works out. So we have reconstructed sunspot cycles back to basically 1610 from the first telescopes. And the earlier data is a little sketchy, but really good data starts to come in around the mid 18th century. And that's, I believe, when the first sunspot cycle, the official number of a cycle started, was in those roughly in that era. But that's a good question. Anyone else?
All right, let's thank Star Party Queen again.